"Don't touch me, you stupid black girl!" The words cut through the opulent silence of the Ritz-Carlton's grand ballroom like a blade through silk. They shattered the refined atmosphere where crystal clinked softly against china, where a pianist's gentle melodies had been weaving through conversations worth billions, where power brokers spoke in hushed tones that could move markets with a whisper. Everyone froze. Every conversation died. Every phone discreetly angled toward the unfolding scene. Marcus Wellington, billionaire CEO of Wellington Dynamics, didn't even look up as he brushed imaginary lint from his custom Armani suit. A few drops of spilled wine had dared to mar his pristine appearance, and his irritation was palpable. The woman standing before him, Keisha Johnson, remained perfectly still, a pristine white cloth in one hand, a water pitcher in the other. She didn't speak. She didn't flinch. She didn't apologize. She didn't need to. What Marcus Wellington couldn't possibly have known was that Keisha wasn't just another server working the most exclusive investor dinner of the year. She was Victoria Hoffman's adopted daughter, raised. From age 7, valedictorian of her graduating class, former Olympic hopeful, now working at this luxury hotel not out of necessity, but by choice, to observe, to learn, to expose. Marcus didn't just insult a black woman, he insulted the most important person in the room, and he did it with cameras rolling and the future of his $3.8 billion acquisition hanging in the balance. This isn't just a story about arrogance meeting its match. It's about power, prejudice, and the quiet strength of someone who has been underestimated one too many times. Until tonight. Because what happens next will redefine everything we think we know about. Who really holds power in the room? Keisha Johnson was forged in fire long before she ever set foot in that ballroom. At 27, she carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had learned that survival wasn't about making noise, it was about making moves. Her mother had died when Keisha was 16. Not the gentle passing that movies promise, but the brutal, relentless kind that cancer delivers, taking everything, dignity, savings, hope. Her father had never been more than a signature on a birth certificate. So when the funeral ended and the last casserole dish was returned, Keisha became everything to her younger brother Marcus, an 8-year-old boy with autism who saw the world through different eyes, but felt it just as deeply. She had been a track star then, flying around curves with scholarship offers from Division I schools scattered across her bedroom wall like promises of a different life. But dreams don't pay for specialized therapy sessions or keep the lights on. So, Keisha folded up those letters, laced up different shoes, and stepped into the workforce with the quiet determination that would define her life. 3 jobs, 7 days a week. Not because she had to prove anything to anyone, but because Marcus needed consistency, and consistency cost money she didn't have. The world saw what it wanted to see. Another young black woman behind a counter carrying a tray, blending into the background of other people's important moments. She let them see exactly that. Because sometimes invisibility was the most powerful position of all. It let you watch, learn, and understand how power really moved when people thought no one was paying attention. Her position at the Ritz-Carlton wasn't random. Keisha had turned down easier jobs, quieter positions. But serving in the spaces where billionaires made deals over dessert wine gave her something invaluable. Access to how the world really worked. Not the sanitized version taught in business schools, but the raw, unfiltered reality of how people with power treated people without it when they thought it didn't matter. So when Marcus Wellington looked through her as if she were furniture, Keisha didn't react. She cataloged. When he spoke to her like she was less than human, she didn't shrink. She observed. Because queens don't fight in the moment. They plan for the victory. Marcus Wellington had built his empire on a simple philosophy. Emotion was weakness, and weakness was unacceptable. At 39, he commanded Wellington Dynamics with the iron fist of someone who had clawed his way from middle-class mediocrity to the Forbes list through sheer force of will and an almost supernatural ability to identify and exploit opportunity. His company had started in a cramped garage in Austin, Texas, with nothing but a revolutionary idea about artificial intelligence and 3 maxed-out credit cards. 12 years later, Wellington Dynamics was valued at over $40 billion, employed 30,000 people across 6 continents, and Marcus was the kind of CEO who appeared on magazine covers with headlines like The Disruptor and Tomorrow's Visionary Today. But Marcus didn't credit vision for his success. He credited ruthlessness. In his world, business was war conducted in conference rooms, and sentiment was a luxury he couldn't afford. He fired executives not for failing, but for hesitating. He closed divisions not because they weren't profitable, but because they weren't profitable enough. His employees whispered his name with the same mixture of fear and respect reserved for natural disasters, powerful, inevitable, and potentially devastating. Marcus had studied the psychology of power. With the dedication of a PhD candidate, he knew how to read micro-expressions, how to use silence as a weapon, how to make grown men second-guess themselves with nothing more than a raised eyebrow. He had built his reputation on being the smartest person in every room, the one who saw 3 moves ahead while everyone else was still figuring out the game. What he had never learned to see was character. He could read a profit and loss statement like poetry, but he couldn't recognize dignity when it stood right in front of him holding a water pitcher. On this night, that blind spot would cost him everything. The grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton looked like something designed by angels with unlimited budgets. Ivory silk draped from 30-foot ceilings, crystal chandeliers cast diamonds of light across mahogany tables set with china worth more than most people's cars. The soft jazz ensemble in the corner played music that seemed to flow like liquid, gold, providing the perfect soundtrack for conversations that could reshape industries. This wasn't just another networking event. This was the dinner, the kind of exclusive gathering where billion-dollar futures were decided over appetizers, where handshake deals made before dessert could launch or destroy companies by breakfast. Tonight's guest of honor was Victoria Hoffman, the legendary investor whose name alone could make stock prices dance. At 71, the German-born financial genius had built Hoffman Capital into the most respected private equity firm on the planet. Her portfolio read like a list of the world's most successful and ethical companies, and her reputation was built on something rarer than profit: principle. Victoria didn't invest in just good ideas. She invested in good people. And her due diligence process was legendary, not just for the financial forensics, but for the character investigations. She had been known to walk away from guaranteed returns because she didn't like how a CEO treated their assistant, or to increase her investment because she respected how a founder handled failure. Tonight, she was considering a full acquisition of Wellington Dynamics for $3.8 billion. The tech world had been buzzing about the potential deal for months. Marcus Wellington's company was innovative, profitable, and positioned for explosive growth. On paper, it was exactly the kind of investment Victoria's firm specialized in, but Victoria Hoffman had learned long ago that the most important information was never on paper. Keisha moved through the evening like a dancer who knew every step of an intricate choreography. She understood the rhythm of high-end service, knew which guests preferred their wine glasses filled to exactly 1/3, which ones made eye contact, and which ones looked through her as if she were made of air. She had spent days preparing for this evening, not just memorizing dinner preferences and wine pairings, but studying the players. She knew Marcus Wellington's reputation, had read every interview, watched every public appearance. She knew Victoria Hoffman's investment philosophy, understood that tonight wasn't just about numbers, it was about values, and Keisha was ready to serve more than dinner. It happened so quickly that later, people would argue about the exact sequence of events. Some swore the wine glass was already unsteady when Keisha approached the table. Others insisted it was perfectly stable until the moment it tipped. What everyone agreed on was this: the Bordeaux spilled like spilled blood across the pristine white tablecloth, moving with deliberate slowness toward Marcus Wellington's custom-tailored sleeve. Keisha's reaction was instinctive, years of professional training compressed into a single motion. "I'm so sorry, sir," she said softly, reaching. Immediately with a cloth napkin to minimize the damage. Marcus Wellington's response was not instinctive. It was revelatory. "Don't touch me, you stupid black girl." The words didn't echo. They landed with the heavy finality of a judge's gavel. Conversations didn't just stop. They evaporated. The jazz trio let their final note hang in the air, unsure, whether to continue playing or disappear into the wallpaper. Phones tilted upward as instinctively as flowers turning toward sunlight. Keisha stood perfectly still, cloth in hand, eyes lowered. She had heard worse whispered behind her back, had endured subtle slights and microaggressions that were designed to cut without leaving visible scars. But this was different. This time everyone was watching. Marcus didn't apologize. He didn't even seem to realize that anything particularly noteworthy had happened. He reached for a fresh napkin with the casual dismissiveness of someone brushing away a mosquito. One of his junior executives shifted uncomfortably, letting out a nervous chuckle that died instantly in the suffocating silence. But across the table, Victoria Hoffman set down her fork with the deliberate precision of someone making a decision that couldn't be unmade. Keisha finally stepped back, her voice steady as mountain stone. "Please enjoy your evening, sir." Not a single note of anger. No defensive reaction. Just the quiet dignity of someone who knew that real power wasn't about who could shout the loudest. It was about who could maintain their grace when everyone else lost theirs. The room struggled to resume its normal rhythm, but something fundamental had shifted. Small talk felt forced. Laughter sounded hollow, and phones buzzed with messages that would soon reshape the business world. Victoria Hoffman remained absolutely still, watching everything with the patient attention of someone who had learned to read character the way others read financial statements. And in that moment, Marcus Wellington's empire began to crumble, not from external pressure, but from the rot within it, finally being exposed to light. Victoria Hoffman didn't move when others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. She didn't clear her throat or check her phone when the awkward silence stretched like taffy. She simply observed with the stillness of someone who had survived far worse than dinner party discomfort. At 71, Victoria had seen men like Marcus Wellington her entire career. Different faces, different companies, same arrogance. She had grown up in post-war Berlin, raised by a grandmother who had taught her that true character revealed itself not in moments of triumph, but in how people treated those who couldn't fight back. Victoria had watched Keisha handle the incident with a grace that most CEOs couldn't manage in their best moments. The young woman's composure spoke of strength earned through struggle, dignity maintained despite disrespect. It reminded Victoria of herself at that age, overlooked, underestimated, but never broken. But what happened next would haunt Marcus Wellington for the rest of his career. Without warning, Marcus reached out and grabbed Keisha's wrist as she moved, to refill his water glass, not violently, but with enough pressure to make his point clear. "Next time," he said quietly, his voice carrying the cold authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed, "you wait until I'm finished speaking before you approach this table. Real business doesn't get interrupted by the help." Keisha met his eyes directly. "Yes, sir. I understand completely." She didn't pull away aggressively. She simply waited until he released her, then continued her service with the same professional grace she had shown all evening. But Victoria Hoffman had seen enough. She leaned toward her assistant and spoke 2 words in German. Es reicht. Enough. The assistant nodded, rose quietly, and stepped into the hallway to make a phone call that would change everything. Marcus continued talking, still trying to navigate the room's energy back to business, still confident that his wealth and position would smooth over any rough edges. He had no idea that his fate had just been sealed by his own actions, because Victoria Hoffman had made her decision, and once she decided something, the entire financial world usually followed her lead. Victoria Hoffman rose from her seat with the unhurried grace of someone who never needed to rush because everyone else waited for her. The action itself was enough to silence every conversation in the ballroom. Waiters paused mid-step. Investors turned in their chairs. Even the jazz ensemble seemed to play more softly, as if the music itself understood that something momentous was about to unfold. "Mr. Wellington," Victoria said, her accent carrying the authority of someone who had learned English as a 3rd language, but spoke it with more precision than native speakers. "Before we continue our discussion, I believe there is someone you should meet properly." Marcus forced his most confident smile. "Of course, Mrs. Hoffman. I'm always eager to meet members of your team." Victoria didn't return the smile. Instead, she gestured toward the back of the room where Keisha stood with perfect posture, no longer carrying a tray, no longer playing a role. "This," Victoria said, placing a gentle hand on Keisha's shoulder as she approached, "is Keisha Johnson, my daughter." The silence that followed was the kind that seems to have physical weight. Marcus's smile didn't fade so much as it froze, like a photograph of confidence taken at the exact moment it died. "Keisha was adopted when she was 7 years old," Victoria continued, her voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom. "She chose to keep her birth name, but make no mistake. She is my daughter in every way that matters, and I am proud to be her mother." Keisha stood beside Victoria, not behind her. Equals in dignity, if not in years. "She has been working here tonight," Victoria continued, "not because she needed the employment, but because she wanted to understand American business culture from a perspective that most people in power never experience. She wanted to see how leaders treat people when they think those people don't matter." The murmur that rippled through the crowd was like distant thunder, the sound of 200 powerful people simultaneously realizing that they had just witnessed something that would be remembered and retold for years to come. "Tonight, you all witnessed exactly what she hoped to understand." Victoria's voice remained calm, but every word carried the weight of judgment. "The young woman you called stupid graduated summa cum laude from Stanford with dual degrees in economics and social psychology. She spoke at the World Economic Forum last year about corporate responsibility, and she has more integrity in her little finger than some people have in their entire organizations." Marcus Wellington's face had gone pale. His mouth opened, but no words came. Around the ballroom, phones were no longer discreetly recording. They were openly capturing every second of what would soon become the most expensive mistake in corporate history. Keisha finally spoke, her voice clear and strong. "Character isn't about how you treat your equals, Mr. Wellington. It's about how you treat people when you think they can't affect your success. Tonight you showed everyone exactly who you are." Victoria nodded once, a gesture that somehow contained more finality than any gavel. "The acquisition is terminated effective immediately." And with those 6 words, Marcus Wellington lost not just $3.8 billion, but his entire legacy. The sound of chairs scraping against marble shouldn't be able to topple an empire, but sometimes the smallest sounds carry the most weight. One by one, investors began to stand. Not dramatically, not with grand gestures, but with the quiet certainty of people who had just witnessed something that made them reconsider everything. Marcus Wellington remained frozen at his table as the room slowly emptied around him. His phone began buzzing, first occasionally, then persistently, then constantly. board members, legal advisors, PR specialists, major investors, all demanding explanations for something that was already beyond explanation. By the time the last guest had filed out, leaving Marcus alone with his executives and the aftermath of his arrogance, the damage was already cascading through the digital world like a financial tsunami. The video had gone viral within the first hour, not just on social media, but on financial news networks, business blogs, and international news outlets. Tech, CEO's racist outburst costs billions, was trending on Twitter. LinkedIn was flooded with posts about corporate culture and leadership accountability. The stock market, even though it was closed, was already responding through after-hours trading. Wellington Dynamics stock plummeted 23% before trading was halted. Then another 18% when it resumed. Major clients began issuing statements of serious concern about their partnerships. Key employees started resigning before they could be associated with the scandal. Corporate sponsors pulled their contracts. Strategic alliances crumbled. But the most devastating blow came from an unexpected source: Wellington Dynamics' own employees. The company's internal Slack channels exploded with messages from staff members sharing their own experiences with Marcus's leadership style. Stories that had been whispered in break rooms suddenly had names attached. Patterns of behavior that had been excused as demanding leadership were recontextualized as evidence of deeper character flaws. By sunrise, the board of directors had called an emergency meeting. By noon, Marcus Wellington was officially suspended as CEO pending a full investigation. By the end of the week, his access to company facilities had been revoked. His executive team had been restructured, and Wellington Dynamics was scrambling to rebuild a reputation that had taken 12 years to build and 12 hours to destroy. The man who had believed that power meant never having to apologize learned that some mistakes are too public, too clear, and too damaging to survive, no matter how much money you have. 6 months later, Keisha Johnson walked through the gleaming corridors of Hoffman Capital's New York headquarters, but this time she wasn't carrying a tray. She wore a tailored blazer in deep navy blue, her hair pulled back in the confident style of someone who had found her place in the world, not been assigned one. The nameplate on her office door read, Keisha Johnson, Director of Ethical Investment Oversight. It wasn't a ceremonial position created for good publicity. It was a real role with real authority, created because Victoria Hoffman had recognized something that Marcus Wellington had missed entirely: that the most valuable insights often came from the people who were closest to the ground but had the clearest view of the sky. On her first day in the role, Keisha addressed the entire company via video conference. Employees from London to Tokyo tuned in to hear from the woman whose quiet strength had reshaping how the business world thought about leadership. 6 months ago, she began, her voice steady and sure, I was called stupid by someone who confused his title with his worth. I said nothing in that moment, but today I want to speak about what we learned. The virtual room was completely silent. Real leadership isn't about who has the loudest voice or the biggest title. It's about who creates space for other voices to be heard. It's about understanding that every person in an organization has value that extends far beyond their job description. And it's about recognizing that how we treat people when we think it doesn't matter is actually when it matters most. She paused, looking directly into the camera. At Hoffman Capital, we don't just invest in companies. We invest in character. We fund not just innovation, but integrity. Because we've learned that the most successful businesses aren't built on quarterly profits. They're built on daily choices to treat people with dignity and respect. The applause that followed wasn't polite corporate clapping. It was genuine, sustained, and came from people who had just heard something they had been waiting their entire careers to hear. What happened in that ballroom wasn't really about Marcus Wellington or Keisha Johnson, though their stories will be told in business schools for generations. It was about all of us. It was about the choices we make when we think no one important is watching. Marcus Wellington lost $3.8 billion not because of market forces or competitive pressure, but because he failed the simplest test of human decency, treating another person with basic respect. He forgot that in our interconnected world, everyone is someone's daughter or son, someone's hope and pride, someone who matters to people who might matter to you. Keisha Johnson didn't win because she was perfect or because she had a powerful mother. She won because she understood something that all the business school degrees in the world can't teach, that dignity isn't something you earn or lose based on your title or your bank account. It's something you carry within yourself and extend to others, regardless of circumstance. The most powerful people aren't always the ones with the biggest offices or the most expensive suits. Sometimes they're the ones refilling your coffee, taking your order, or cleaning your building after you go home. And how we treat them, really treat them, not just when cameras are rolling, says everything about who we really are. Every day, we all face moments that test our character. At the drive-through window, in the elevator, on the phone with customer service, in meetings with people who can't help our careers. These aren't small moments. They're the moments that define us. Because somewhere in the world, there's always someone watching. Someone who believes that how we treat others is the truest measure of who we are. Someone who remembers not just what we accomplish, but how we accomplish it. And sometimes, that someone has the power to change our entire story. With just a few words, the acquisition is terminated. The question isn't whether we'll be tested. The question is whether we'll pass the test when it comes, whether we'll choose to see the dignity in every person we encounter, or whether we'll make the most expensive mistake of our lives confusing our position with our worth, and forgetting that respect isn't something we give only when it's convenient. Because in the end, character isn't what we do when everyone is watching. It's what we do when we think no one important is watching, and someone important is always watching. Someone who might just be wearing an apron, carrying a tray, and waiting to see who we really are when it matters most.